Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I don't know if you're like me. Maybe you are. You really get the sense that we are just right around the corner from the start of the 2019 college football season, Georgia included, on August 31st against Vanderbilt. I was not at Georgia practice yesterday, but I love following all the coverage of DawgNation and the chatter that's going on in our forum at forum.dawgnation.com. It is fun to watch all of you get as excited as I am about this upcoming season. And one of the guys who was at Georgia practice yesterday, Mike Griffith, will be with us on our program today. We're going to talk about Isaiah Wilson on the show. We'll hear from him. We'll talk about DeAndre Swift's reported absence, at least from the beginning portion of Georgia practice today or yesterday. And I've got a thought or two on Jake Fromm as well and the national attention that he's gained within the last couple of weeks here. So we're very busy, fully loaded on today's show. I'm really glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So, DawgNation's recruiting insider Jeff Sintel said something on our program yesterday. I knew it was true, and yet to hear him say it out loud as starkly as he did and as matter-of-factly as he did, I did think was kind of an interesting moment. We were talking about George Pickens and the dazzling catch that Pickens made in the now viral video, and no, I'm not going to talk about that here right now. We've done plenty of that over the course of the last couple of days, but in the midst of talking about that, Jeff, because of the question I asked him, was talking about how the value of that viral video might aid UGA's recruiting efforts for players like Pickens. Dynamic playmakers, unique skill set, guys like that seem to have been paying attention to what Pickens did. And in the midst of discussing this, Jeff used a phrase that we use from time to time, and Jeff says, I've kind of got verifiable proof this is indeed going on. Listen for the phrase that Jeff used in this brief clip from yesterday's show. We'll get Jeff coming up here in just a minute. Actually, why don't we hold off on the Jeff thing? We'll do some. I'll tell you what he said instead. What Jeff said on this was that he knows for a fact, because he's heard it from other people, that negative recruiting is going on. That programs speak out about Georgia on the basis of the fact that they haven't had big-time receiving totals. No 1,000-yard receiver. Jeff cited in particular the fact that really I think only McCole Hardman last year barely eclipsed the 100-yard mark in a single game, and that's essentially the high water mark for an individual receiver, going back the last couple of years under Kirby Smart, and that's a negative recruiting point that a lot of programs make against Georgia. And one of the things I'm a big believer in, and the reason why I wanted to start with that today as a part of our program here today, is because I think one of the jobs that you do as a program is go out there and eliminate potential fodder for negative recruitment. Because for the most part, in decisions for where you want to play in college or what kind of car you want to buy or where you want to live, it's not so much that you choose a place or you choose a thing. It's that you eliminate the other choices. And I think that Georgia's job in terms of how it positions itself compared to its rivals in recruiting really kind of comes down to how easy does Georgia make it to be negatively recruited against, or the opposite of that, how difficult does Georgia make it to be eliminated from consideration? So obviously, as you watch James Coley's offense in 2019, moving ahead to 2020 and beyond, Georgia establishing itself as not just a place that running backs want to be, and not just a place that elite offensive linemen want to be, but also a place that very good tight ends and wide receivers want to be. That's one of the ways in which Georgia can eliminate an aspect of negative recruiting that I think that some programs are using against it. So does that make sense? Because that transition is to something else as well. Because I believe there is potentially another aspect of negative recruiting that goes on against Georgia. Because let's face it, Georgia has built monumental recruiting momentum. Georgia has put together an unprecedented run of, at least compared to its own program history, in terms of adding very high 4-star and 5-star prospects. Georgia has done an amazing job of doing that, so therefore there are a lot of programs out there who are going to attempt to upend the momentum that Georgia's created. And one of the ways that might be done is for a various program. And gosh knows, if you travel around rival fan message boards or you see opposing fans, rival fans on social media, you know for a fact that one of the things that you hear a good bit is, well, Georgia gets all those 5-star guys, but what do they do with them? Georgia gets those 4 and 5-star guys, but how well do they develop them? It's sort of like the last refuge for someone who's looking for a way to take Georgia down a peg. You say, well, let's find out if Kirby Smart's a good enough coach, because that's what it seemingly always comes back down to. Let's find out if Kirby Smart's a good enough coach to actually develop these players once they get on the Georgia campus. And here's what I think is very interesting. We've actually done our fair share of talking about this over the course of the last couple of days. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that many of the players that arrive on the Georgia campus, sometimes it is of the 5-star variety. We'll get to one of those in just a moment. Sometimes it's of the less than 5-star variety. You see a lot of those, for instance, in the defensive backfield, where those players have come to Georgia not just with prodigious talent, but also with a hunger and a desire to learn and grow, and they have been well developed at the University of Georgia. And do not discount how valuable that ends up being in terms of how future recruits view this program. Because it's one thing for a 5-star to come to Georgia and light the world on fire, and it's another thing for a 5-star to come to Georgia, experience the growing pains that you would probably expect from a transition from high school and college, but to be coached up, developed, and worked up to the point where all of a sudden now he's seemingly fulfilling the potential that he's always had. An example of that is Georgia a right tackle Isaiah Wilson, because Wilson has spoke very candidly in the past, going back to the spring. I had a chance to chat with him along with some other reporters about this, about not playing in 2017. And Wilson said flat out, listen, I wasn't ready to play in 2017. I had to watch that year, but I learned by watching. Kirby was even more candid, frankly, when Wilson first arrived on campus, talking about the fact that he practiced. Do you remember this phrase? He practiced a lot better indoors than outdoors. He was more comfortable in the climate-controlled indoor facility than he was in the Georgia heat after traveling down from Brooklyn, New York, to be a part of the program. This was a young man in 2017 who was not ready, and he was potential fodder for any program out there who wanted to negative recruit against the Bulldogs. Ooh, you don't want to go to Georgia and be an offensive lineman. You might flounder the way that Isaiah Wilson looked like he was floundering in 2017, having a hard time finding a spot on the field. But everything changed in 2018. Wilson earned his starting spot, became a freshman All-American, and when he spoke to reporters again yesterday, he talked about the growth and development he's had when it comes to his time at the University of Georgia, starting with his just basic understanding of the game. Here's Isaiah Wilson.
I've become a student of the game. I like to see what's happening before it happens, see the blitzes before they come, read my keys, and know what to do before the ball is even snapped.
I mean, listen, I don't know this for a fact, but I have a strong suspicion that Isaiah Wilson wasn't recognizing blitzes before they happen, seeing keys as they unfold. He wasn't doing that back summer of 2017, but it's an example of how he's grown and developed over the course of the time at the University of Georgia. And it's not just the mental, cognitive part of all of this. It's also the physical part of this as well. As I said before, Smart at one time before kind of chided Wilson for being a player more comfortable with indoor practices than outdoor practices. He kind of got to him. He probably had, I think even Wilson would admit, a little bit of bad weight on him when he first showed up. He was a big guy, and that's what attracted Sam Pittman to him to begin with, but maybe a little too big when he first showed up on the Georgia campus. That apparently is not the case anymore, as this exchange with Mike Griffith will show you.
You've always been a big guy, but how different is that weight being carried now?
My arms are bigger, my legs are bigger, my stomach is smaller. That's how we did that one.
I love that theme. That's how we did that. My arms and legs got bigger, my stomach got smaller. Wilson should write a book, and he should give it to me, because I will tell you that's probably something I could use a dose of right now. A little bigger arms, maybe some bigger legs, certainly a smaller stomach, whatever worked for Wilson. Maybe that's what I need to be doing there as well. But let me just kind of wrap up this portion of the conversation by saying this way. Wilson's role for this current Georgia team is incredibly valuable, but do not discount what his value might also be to future UGA recruiting efforts as well. When a guy like that, a former 5-star player who was maybe also a guy that was going to have to get acclimated to SEC Live over the course of a couple years on campus, when he's saying, I'm a student of the game now, I know what I'm supposed to do, physically I'm in the best shape of my life, That's the kind of thing that also has a little bit of a ricochet effect when it comes to recruiting as well. Now, before I move off this topic, let me kind of shift gears, still on the subject of Wilson, but on a completely different point. Because speaking of recruiting, and I do love this stuff, I will admit that, Wilson yesterday was asked about, because let's face it, these offensive linemen are doing battle with the defensive line every single day in practice, big sequence during Saturday's scrimmage, and one of the things that media members like to do, and I will admit I really like this as well, because we don't see much of this. So people who do have eyes on this, people who are experiencing this in real time, their opinion on this kind of stuff is important. So Wilson was asked about the guys that he's battling with in practice, and he gave a name that I think UGA fans will like to hear. Here's more of the Georgia right tackle.
Anybody jumping out on that D-line edge, Isaiah? Anybody new or young?
Trayvon Walker.
Trayvon Walker.
Very athletic and rangy guy. Super athletic.
So listen, I mean, I love to hear that. I don't know, because of the way that defensive line is a tough spot for freshmen to play, I don't know how much of that we'll see from Walker, especially early in the year, but it sure is nice to hear from Isaiah Wilson that he's seeing that. And the same path that Wilson on the offensive side of the ball has gone down in terms of developing himself, it would not surprise me if Trayvon Walker travels that same path on the defensive side of the ball as well. Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad to have you with us here today, and really excited about what's going to be coming up on Thursday, June 22nd. The big event for us is the Kroger Kickoff. It's going to take place that night at the Kroger Marketplace right there in Cumming. We did this last year. Hundreds of folks on hand to start the season. This year's event's going to be even bigger and better for reasons I'll be telling you about as we get closer. But you got to mark your calendars. You got to be there with us. Thursday, August 22nd, 6 p.m., 5550 Bethel View Road in Cumming. Let me give you the address one more time so you can write this down. It's 5550 Bethel View Road in Cumming, the beautiful Kroger Marketplace right there. Cannot wait to see you for our Kroger kickoff as we start the 2019 season by telling you everything that's going to be important for the Dogs this season. And I'll try my best to explain why maybe this is the year the Dogs take it all the way this year. Can't wait to be a part of the Kroger kickoff with you next Thursday right there at the Kroger Marketplace in Cumming. Really excited about that. One of the guys that'll be there with us on Thursday is Mike Griffith from DawgNation. We'll hear from Mike coming up in a couple of minutes on our program today on DawgNation Daily. Before we do that, let me go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And I want to go back to Isaiah Wilson here for a moment, because one of the things, if you read the practice report yesterday at DawgNation.com, that you heard was, and I wasn't there yesterday, so it's hard for me to kind of figure out what this was. There's a lot of scuttlebutt out there. But the one thing at the very least I'm comfortable saying, DeAndre Swift, the Georgia running back, was not seen at practice during the time in which the media was out there. So once again, we've heard from Isaiah Wilson in the show already today. Let me let you hear Wilson being asked about the perception that Swift was absent, at least while the media was out there yesterday. Wilson kind of dodges this question just a bit.
You didn't see him out there today. Did he practice at all?
That is, you guys, Coach Smart, that question? I don't know. I don't really look back there. I focus on the defense and what's in front of me.
So, listen, I don't know what to make about that. As I said before, media members did not see Swift out there. There were some reports that Swift did come back to a practice a little bit later on. I certainly don't have any reason to believe that there's anything wrong with DeAndre Swift. The one thing there seems to be relatively unanimous reporting on is that Swift is probably fine, just wasn't out there during practice when the media was there. However, there is one aspect of this coverage I do want to push back on just a little bit, because I think fans get a bad rap on this. When Swift is not seen at practice, there's going to be this thought of, fans are going to be hysterical about this. Fans are going to be up in arms. They're going to be worried about DeAndre because obviously he's so important to the Georgia offense. But when it comes to Swift in particular, even though what happened yesterday is likely not a big deal at all, in fact, I have no reason to believe it is a big deal, it is worth reminding here a little bit that when it comes to situations involving Swift, the Georgia program, Kirby Smart in particular, has not always been exactly as forthright as I think it could have been. Now, Kirby doesn't owe this to me, but when there are secrets kept, it's only going to raise speculation in a weird moment like a Tuesday when Swift is not seen out there while reporters are out there. I mean, let's go back to early September when Swift wasn't being used a lot, and Kirby Smart at the time would have you believe that was no big deal and nothing going on with that whatsoever. Do you remember this exchange, for instance?
Coach DeAndre Swift didn't play a whole lot after earlier this season. Is that injury or just coach's decision?
No, I thought DeAndre played the first drive. He had the first 2 or 3 carries. I mean, we rotated pretty much after that, and then once we felt like the game was in hand, we were going to play some of those other guys who hadn't had as many carries.
So that's what Smart said then, but come to find out, Swift was recovering from groin surgery, and then come November was seemingly a much healthier player and a much better player, but that's not the story we got early in the season. And then there was the situation from spring practice where former Georgia running back Robert Edwards had been there, had seen practice, and apparently told us something here on DawgNation Daily that I don't know we ever heard anywhere else. Here's the former back on Swift.
I think the most impressive thing that I saw was that these guys are out there practicing hurt in spring practice. They don't have a game this week. DeAndre has a tender ankle right now. He's getting it wrapped up, and he's out there on the practice field with his team practicing.
So I never heard that anywhere else but right here on DawgNation Daily that apparently Swift was dealing with an ankle during spring practice. Now, once again, let me reiterate. I have no reason to believe that anything's wrong with DeAndre Swift right now. When reporters are back out there in the practice field on Thursday, my guess is you'll see Swift. But as long as there is a story behind the story, and seemingly with Swift there always has been one, as long as there's a story behind the story, there's always going to be some speculation from fans when something doesn't appear to line up with what we've been told publicly. Nonetheless, it's Around the Doghouse. It's presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And, my friends at ESOG, they are a solutions-based company. That means if you're dealing at your house with something involving, water creeping into your crawl space or your basement, or if you've got a foundation issue, one of those horizontal cracks, the kind of thing you don't want to see, well, if it's a simple fix, then ESOG is going to tell you exactly how to fix it simply. Just go to the hardware store and get you blah, 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 whatever it'll take. They'll tell you that. But a lot of times this kind of stuff, when it comes to foundation issues, the structural integrity of your home, a lot of the times this is a more serious fix. And the good news is Engineered Solutions of Georgia has 2 full-time engineers on staff to make fixing that kind of stuff effortless and painless for you. It's hard work for them, but they're the experts. They know how to get that done. So my advice is if you're facing a waterproofing issue or a foundation issue, dial this number, 678-ESOG now. Once again, dial 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. It's great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. For more on UGA practice, let's talk to Mike Griffith right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Good to have you as a part of the program here today, and fun to find out more about what happened in Athens yesterday and the aftermath continuing from what I guess Kirby Smart will say was a little bit of a lackluster, disappointing scrimmage. For all that and a whole lot more, let's talk to Mike Griffith here for a moment. And Mike, I know you wrote about DeAndre Swift's absence, at least during the media portion of practice yesterday. As I said to our audience before, I have no reason to believe this is any kind of serious issue. I'm sure Swift is probably fine, but for many fans, and I speak on behalf of fans, there's always going to be a little bit of extra anxiety when it comes to Swift because it always seems like there's a story behind the story. Supposedly he's fine in September, yet we find out he's recovering from groin surgery. Some other things that have been kind of talked about in the past with him. He's a valuable member of the Georgia roster, and when he's not seen, even for just a couple of minutes, it's going to raise the blood pressure of a few fans here and there, is it not?
Well, I agree, B.A., and I think you're right. I'm working on a story much to that same vein. I mean, I'd say get used to it, and when you've got a dynamic athlete like a DeAndre Swift, we see the moves that he makes, the explosivity, the cuts. He's just so finely tuned, and Jeff Santana and I talk about it all the time. Whether we want to compare him to a Porsche or a German car that needs fine tuning, or a race car, he is that fast twitch guy, much like sprinters, I suppose. And you just wonder, the word that comes up is durability. And I don't know if that's fair or not. I mean, does it mean he's not durable if he gets extra treatment, or that he needs a little bit more recovery time, or is this something that's kind of the norm? Is this the way maybe you want to treat a guy like a DeAndre Swift? You want to make sure that 100% sure that he's healthy. I know that Kirby turned him loose in the practice, and I will say this. I was surprised to see him going head up with Tate Crowder and Monty Rice in the hitting drill. I know that at other schools that I covered, like, for example, Le'Veon Bell at Michigan State wasn't doing those drills his junior year. He didn't need any, he wasn't put out there to mash heads with starting linebackers. So I do think DeAndre Swift is a tough kid. I think they expose him to as much contact in practice as anyone else. But as far as how he handles that, he's not Elijah Holyfield. Holyfield was an incredibly durable guy, and I think that's why Holyfield started last year.
Well, when it comes to just missing a little bit of one practice, that won't cause me to question Swift's durability because, frankly, as I said before, I don't have any reason to suspect anything's wrong with him right now. But the one thing I will agree with you on is I do believe that Swift is a different kind of player than a fully healthy Zamir White is. You compared him to Elijah Holyfield before. I don't think there's any doubt that Swift and Holyfield are very different kind of players. You compared him to a sports car, I'll compare him to an investment. The capitalization rate, the return rate on one touch from DeAndre Swift is really pretty high, and so therefore, to see the best of Swift, you don't necessarily need to see him getting 25 carries a game. You don't necessarily need to see him doing some of the kinds of things other running backs around college football are going to do in that regard. So from that standpoint, he probably will be and has been used a little differently than some UGA running backs will be.
Yeah, is there a point of diminishing return on the investment? Is that what you're saying, DA, that 15 carries could be better than 20 carries in the long run? I'm going to roll with you on that.
Yeah, in all seriousness, I do think for DeAndre Swift, 15 carries might be better than 20 carries. I really do because of what he can do on an explosive level that other running backs, maybe even Zamir White, for instance, is at least right now not able to match.
Right. No, I'd agree. And you look in the backfield, and they do have a full complement of other runners back there. And, and why would you give them more work if you've got someone else that's just as capable? Now, you want to here's the bottom line to me. Kirby Smart wants DeAndre Swift healthy the first week of December and in January. And he wants to be undefeated then, too, by the way. So how do you get there? I mean, how much DeAndre Swift are we really going to see in the month of September? How much do we really need to see in the month of September? I mean, the first half against Vanderbilt, what's the over-under for carries against Vandy if we think Georgia wins by 3 touchdowns? Maybe 12? And then how much do you really need to see him against Arkansas State and Murray State? I mean, 5, 7, 10? I don't know those numbers, but you sure want to see him a lot against Notre Dame. And if this is part of how DeAndre's managed, with the extra treatment, and he said it. He said it last week. He might have even, I think he might have been there a day. He said, "I live in the training room," and that's nothing to be ashamed of. Getting treatment is a very responsible thing. But when it bleeds over into practice time, we all kind of wonder. And I was there when some NFL scouts were talking about it, and someone asked where he was, and another scout said to him, "Coach said he'll come out after the media leaves. He's in the training room, getting treatment." And had I not heard that conversation, my pulse might have gone up a little bit more yesterday, too. But having overheard, because those scouts are there to see that. And that resonates with them, too, by the way, because they're looking at Swift as you mentioned, you compared him to an investment. He really is an investment for an NFL team in the draft.
Let me transition and speak about another running back just for a moment, and that's Zamir White. And it's really amazing all the complimentary things that Georgia players say when asked about White, and they all kind of seem to center around the same kind of stuff about just how explosive and physically tough he can be. I know, what was it that Coley called him, a rhino or a moose or whatever he called him? I mean, he's he seems to have that reputation, but there are also these whispers that, he may have caught passes on Saturday, which seemingly bolsters the claim that this throwing the ball to running backs, did it a lot with Swift a year ago, doing it with White this year. That's going to be a big part of the Georgia offense maybe this season. One way or another, I think the thing that the fan ought to be the most excited about is it certainly doesn't seem like Zamir White is a player any different from any of the other 84 guys on the roster right now. He is a formerly injured running back he is not a currently injured running back. He is a guy that is seemingly back on track and back playing, and my guess is August 31st, and barring some sort of weird setback, that's exactly how he's going to be used against Vanderbilt. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And Kirby talking about pass protection. Kirby talking about ball protection. We're past the pity party for Zamir White. Everybody's like, okay, now he's a football player. Like you just said, he's just like anybody else. And he's going to get chirped on about how well he pass protects. He's going to get chirped on about, his ball security. And because they're looking to play the guy. I put out that highlight video. I released that highlight video. And, Channing Tindall is a tough guy, folks. Listen, there's no shame in this that Channing Tindall got knocked sideways. Zamir White he's a bad dude, man. And Isaiah was talking about it last night. He pities the safety that's got to come up and fill the hole. Zamir White runs with passion. He runs angry. He's a bigger, faster, more physical version than Elijah Holyfield was last year.
And, when people have asked me, is there a way or a reason to temper expectations when it comes to White, the only thing I'll say in response to that, Mike, is I am of the belief, and listen, this is speculation on my part, but that's essentially what I do for a living. I'm of the belief, because of what I think I know about a healthy DeAndre Swift, what I think I know about a healthy Zamir White, what I believe is true regarding Brian Herrien, I do think the overall distribution of productivity for the Georgia running backs this season is going to be a little different than it's been the last couple of years. It was a 1,000-yard season for each of Elijah Holyfield and Swift a year ago. It was Michelle and Chubb in 2017, and you had a kind of a clear number 3 running back below that. As we get closer to the season, I find myself firmly in the belief that this year the carries may be spread a little more evenly among White, Swift, and Brian Herrien. But I do think as much praise has been tossed Zamir White's way, I still think that Brian Herrien's a significant part of the Georgia offense. So if there's ever a reason to bet the under on what White may do this year, maybe the only reason I'd be tempted to do that is I don't think that Brian Herrien's going to sit the bench a whole bunch. I think he's out there a good bit himself. So do with that what you will, but I see this as more of a three-headed monster where each guy gets in the neighborhood of 800 or 900 yards, more so than Swift getting 1,500 and White getting 1,100 and somebody else, kind of coming in third place there. I see it a little more evenly distributed amongst that trio. How do you see it?
I'm with you, and I think the schedule has something to do with it. As we were just talking about a minute ago, I think you're going to see a lot of Brian Herrien in September. I think Brian's going to do a lot of the dirty work. I think he's going to do a lot of the blue-collar work. I think he's going to do a lot of the goal-line work. But I think Zamir White is too. But as the season progresses, because he does have remember, he hadn't played football in a year and a half. So some of these other skills, I think he's going to go after him. He's a cannibal. The guy's going to go 110%. He's going to attack every day, but it's going to take some time, to get back in sync and get these other football skills back, the pass protection, the route running, these type of things, the things that Brian Herrien as a senior is a little more polished at right now. So go ahead and use Brian Herrien in September, and by the end of because Brian's going to make it through the year. Brian's a tough guy. He's shown you that. He's a durable guy. So what you ideally want is to win every football game and to be at max efficiency come the first week of December. And the way to do that is to bring Zamir along a little bit slower. You've got the luxury to do that. I think he could play a lot more early, but you've got a luxury to bring him along a little bit slower in terms of game reps. Protect Swift a little bit. Keep him all waxed and polished up there in the shop. Yeah, you got to clean those tires on Swift and keep him in the garage on the rainy days for now. But you want all 4 of those guys, or 5 of those guys, who knows, maybe Kenny McIntosh emerges. You want them all clicking come that November home stretch and into December.
Well, it's kind of funny. You mentioned the other backs, and Matthew McGahee, Kibo Weir in our Facebook comment section, we're talking about James Cook, essentially saying with me talking up Herrien, talking up White, talking up Swift, that there's not enough talk about James Cook. And, Mike, I will admit that my opinion is that the 3 guys that I just mentioned do have some separation ahead of James Cook. That's once again speculation on my part, but you got to have an opinion about something, and that just happens to be my opinion. I believe. Go ahead.
I'll disagree with you. I will disagree with you, and not for the sake of those commenters, but that I've been the guy doing backflips about James Cook ever since I saw him in that scrimmage. You know that. Everybody's clear on that I think James Cook is an unbelievable running back. I think he might ultimately be the guy that does the most in the NFL. How's that for a prediction? But his explosivity, his electricity, and the way that I hear Kirby Smart talking about him, it's just I'm not exactly sure how they're going to. I know he's on special teams. I know they're looking at him to be that return guy. I know they're going to throw him out of the backfield. I don't know how much he's going to carry the ball. But I would agree with the commenters. I think he's explosive. I think this would be a great DawgNation Cover 4 topic. Which running back will have the most total yardage if we include return yardage and receiving yardage? I would put my money on James Cook being the closest. If Swift stays healthy, it's got to be Swift. But I would say that James Cook would have the second most total yardage out of those backs. That's just my opinion.
That's very interesting. It's a surprising opinion. I'm glad you shared it with us. Let me kind of finish up on this topic. The Saturday scrimmage and Kirby's dissatisfaction with it. Of all the things that kind of came out of the chatter from that, I took Kirby's dissatisfaction to be the most, with the exception of the obviously viral Pickens video, the dissatisfaction that Kirby showed, I took that to be real. I even asked Andrew Thomas, is this the kind of thing that a coach is just supposed to say, or did you take him at his word on that? Obviously, he's going to say that he took him at his word, but I'm assuming that Kirby also meant what he said. What did you make of apparently the younger guys, the less experienced guys, the non-starters, if you will, being the one bringing the sense of urgency and being the ones bringing the real energy and juice to that thing on Saturday? What did you make of that assessment from Smart?
Yeah, wow. Well, it was then Charlie Warner said Monday he thought that he pretty much called his teammates out and challenged them. Charlie Warner being the leader, saying, "Hey, we got to get mentally tougher. We can't let the heat." And he said, "We got to pull the young guys along with us." So I thought that was an interesting caveat that he found there. No, he's sincere, BA. I mean, and I said this. I've said this before. I mean, there's no margin for error for this Georgia football team, and that's what Kirby Smart understands. When Kirby Smart says 24-5 is not good enough, that sounds like coach speak too, but it's not. If we're honest with ourselves, nothing less than a national championship is going to make fans happy. No one's going to say, "Oh, it's okay that they got there and lost to Clemson." No one's going to say, "Oh, well, this time Alabama, it's all right." No, nobody's going to say, "Well, LSU was better if they beat them." Nobody's going to say, "Oh, well, it was at all." But nobody's going to give Georgia an out if they lose a football game this year. Nobody's going to say it's okay. Nobody's going to feel okay and say, "Well, there's next year." That's not the mindset right now, and Kirby Smart knows that. So when he's talking about his football, he is looking at them and measuring them on a championship level. And they do not measure up right now in the pass game at a championship level. And why would they? They lost their top 5 receivers, and Jake's trying to get in sync with his receivers. You've got a very good story up on that on DawgNation right now.
Thank you, Mike.
So why would they? So why would they at this stage of the fall? So no, Kirby's not just throwing it out there. And let's remember, at the end of the conversation, at the end of the day, however the season turns out, you're still going to have Florida and Georgia Tech's athletic directors in that room deciding whether or not Georgia gets in a playoff. So Georgia better not lose the game, in my opinion.
Well, Mike, it's always fun to hear your thoughts on Georgia football. Your coverage of practice has been also incredibly fun to read as well. I'll look forward to seeing you myself in Athens on Thursday. And, of course, another big scrimmage for Georgia to go out and correct some of its mistakes this Saturday as well. We'll keep following you along at DawgNation and talk to you back here on DawgNation Daily again very soon as well.
All right, appreciate that. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So let me say this about the James Cook thing just for a moment, because it is a hot topic in our comment section, especially when I go on and on about Harry and who I am a big believer in, White, who I think everybody's a big believer in, and DeAndre Swift, at this point, is a proven commodity. There is a pretty significant constituency that says, count me on the James Cook bandwagon. I get where that's coming from. But here's the thing, though. If you're going to make the case for Cook surpassing one of those other guys, you've also got to make the case for why one of them might falter. We don't like saying that because Georgia fans want to bet the over on all of the skill position players in this team. All the receivers have more yards than the national media thinks. All the running backs have more yards than the national media thinks. But if you're going to have him leapfrog ahead of somebody else in the pecking order, and it is a pecking order. Harrigan's been here longer. White was a higher rated recruit coming out of high school. DeAndre Swift has been the leading rusher for Georgia before. There is kind of an unofficial hierarchy established there. If Cook is going to leapfrog someone in that, you not only have to make the case for James, you have to make the case against one of those others. And right now, I don't have a bad word to say about James Cook whatsoever, but I don't have a very strong case to be made for why one of those other running backs might falter, barring injury now. Now, an injury changes everything. In that point in time, then you better believe my opinion will be altered. I hope an injury doesn't occur, but if it does, that does kind of change everything there. But apart from that, I don't see how you get there. And the same thing is true because I know one of the things a lot of fans would like to see is a lot of two-back sets. We even talked about this during our R.S. Andrews cool-down yesterday. A lot of two-back sets where maybe Cook is your jet sweep guy or he's your slot receiver catching passes. But once again, if you put him in that spot, then you've got to make the case for why Demetrius Robertson goes off the field or Kearis Jackson goes off the field or, Dominic Blaylock goes off the field. Those are guys that otherwise would be in that spot. It's kind of like if you ever go to these preseason football websites and look at the teams that project every NFL record, if you're doing that correctly, you ought to equal the same number of wins and losses. But a lot of these national websites don't do that. They end up having the league going 30 games over 500 against itself. That's impossible. It used to be the same way when it comes to bracketology stuff. A lot of these guys that project NCAA basketball tournament fields have 80 teams in the NCAA tournament. You can't obviously do that. So if you're projecting who the true playmakers are going to be for Georgia, you've also kind of got to project someone that you think maybe just misses that mark and has to wait his turn again for next year. Now, opinions are going to vary, and your mileage is going to vary on this a little bit too. It's one of the things I love about the preseason conversation. A lot of folks see it just a little bit different way. Before we move on and do the rest of our SEC through, let me also remind you about my friends at Kroger. Did you know that right now at select Kroger stores you can get 1 hour delivery? I don't know about you, but for my wife, my family, this is a godsend because, let's face it, we don't have a lot of time. I'm working, 24 hours a day, it seems like, this time of year. That leaves all the shopping to go to my wife, and she's got kids to take care of and everything else. That means we need the convenience that comes from Kroger. And the best way for you to find out more about this, let me give you a couple ways. It's Kroger.com or the Kroger app. You can find out about the stores that are participating in this program, and you can place your order today. Get some of your time back. It's one of the ways in which Kroger makes life super easy and convenient for all of us, and I appreciate them doing that. Check them out online at Kroger.com or on the Kroger app for more information on that. With that said, let me do a couple of SEC through things here for a moment. Do we have this tweet? Brenton Cox tweeting out a little Florida talk here. He says, all these shots I'm taking, they must know I'm bulletproof. Now, is that a music lyric, or did he write that line himself? The crack staff here at DawgNation World Headquarters doesn't know. So apparently Cox listening to a little bit of what's been said. And listen, I don't have a bad word to say about Brenton Cox, and I've made that pretty clear. But SEC football is not beanbag. This is not tiddlywinks. This is not PE or rec league sports where everybody gets a participation trophy at the end of the season. There are going to be some hurt feelings when one guy comes to Georgia, then goes and plays for Florida. So Brenton's a big boy. He understands that, and I'm sure he's going to be fine with that. You won't hear on us on this program saying anything bad about him, really whatsoever. We don't really say that about any player, for the most part. But at the same time, probably best for him to stay off social media for a little bit because the Florida-Georgia rivalry, or the Georgia-Florida rivalry in this case, is a pretty intense one right now, and he finds himself kind of at the center of that. A couple other SEC stories to get to. I saw where Alabama, I guess, it's been reported is going to do one of these hard knock style shows. There are a few teams that may do this with HBO, and I don't know. This may be the one area in which Alabama and Georgia are a little different, smart, cut from a different cloth than Nick Saban. I think this is kind of a cool thing. I don't think it's detrimental to Alabama. I don't think any secrets will be revealed by this. But somehow I don't see Kirby Smart ever wanting to do this. I just don't. Now, he'll do some national media stuff with his team from time to time, but something tells me this is not something Kirby Smart would like. In the late stages of Nick Saban's career, he's become much more media friendly. Something tells me, though, Kirby Smart probably not going to go down that road if asked, but we'll see. You talk about must-see TV. It would be fun to see it if he did do that. And then let me also finish up with this. I saw one of these ESPN analysts. The truth is, I'd never even heard of the guy. I don't know who it is. But he was on TV somewhere talking about how he was wrong about Joe Burrow, and he had been critical of Burrow, but come to find out Joe Burrow, the LSU quarterback, may be way better than he thought he was. And I'm not going to tell you that Joe Burrow is the all-SEC quarterback. I'm not going to tell you he's in the same category of a Jake Fromm or a Tua Tagovailoa or anything like that. But here's the one thing I will tell you about Burrow. I believe he's fine. I believe he's whatever your threshold for a good quarterback is. I believe that Burrow is probably a good quarterback. The month of November last year, I think, indicates that. He played well late in the season, played well against some opponents that were really looking for a big win, and Burrow delivered some big throws for LSU there in that moment. I think Burrow and the misperception of him as being kind of the typical LSU quarterback is part of the reason why I've kind of cast my lot with LSU upending Alabama and winning the SEC West. I believe this LSU offense is going to be better than some people realize. And I think that Burrow is going to be a reason why. He's not in the category of a Jake Fromm. He's not in the category of a Tua Tagovailoa. But he's better than a lot of folks realize. And I think that this, ESPN guy I haven't heard of saying this, I think there's actually going to be a lot of media types will be saying this over the course of the first few months of the season. Watch that game against Texas. Sam Ehlinger for the Longhorns gets all the hype. Burrow's going to outplay Ehlinger that day, and the conversation about the Bengal Tigers, the Fighting Tigers from Baton Rouge, I think it changes drastically after that high-profile showdown with the Longhorns. We'll make that your SEC through. And speaking of Jake Fromm, let me talk about him for a moment. There are two national profiles of Fromm out there, and one's strictly online. Another one is online, and you can find this in your printed copy of Sports Illustrated if you still have that sitting next to your sneaker phone. Remember those, the old Sports Illustrated sneaker phone? If you still get Sports Illustrated delivered to your house, you can read about Jake Fromm in there as well. The two stories were pretty similar. I thought the ESPN story written by David Hale, who used to be a UJ beat writer many years ago, I thought was probably the overall better one. And you should read these for yourself. I'll put a link to both of them when we post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com at the end of the day, our podcast. When we post that, I'll put a link to both of these. Here is my ultimate takeaway, though, from reading especially the ESPN piece, which focused in on a lot of Fromm's private life before he got to Georgia. It is obvious that Fromm and his family were big Georgia fans, and seemingly Fromm, up until the point where Rick kind of cast his lot more with Jacob Eason, grew up dreaming of playing for UGA. Not to sound sentimental and hokey, I know some of y'all think I'm too corny sometimes, and I probably am. That's a cool thing for me. It's a really cool thing. And what it leads me to believe is that I believe that Georgia will win a national championship eventually, and it may win a couple under Kirby Smart. Who knows what the future might hold. So from that standpoint, I've kind of said in the past, there isn't a ton of pressure on Georgia right now to win in 2019 because the sky's not falling, the future's still bright 2020 and beyond. But assuming this is Fromm's year, I don't know there would be a better year than for Georgia to win a national championship with a quarterback who once begged a family member to buy him a Herschel Walker autographed football helmet. There is just something a little bit better of dogs who grew up loving the dogs. Winning with those guys would just feel a little better. And the obvious, kind of unspoken context a lot of this is that with Georgia recruiting at the level that it does now, and we all love to see this roster stacked with five-star talent, there's an aspect of that, though, that becomes kind of transactional in nature. A lot of guys are here at Georgia now because it's the place to be. Fromm was liking Georgia before it was the place to be. So you talk about storybook endings. If that young man is the one that truly leads Georgia to the promised land, I don't think you could write a better story than that. So yeah, I thought they were both really good, really interesting. The SI piece kind of got more into some of the quarterback controversy stuff and some of the stuff that may have gone on with Fields last year. Even if some of the stuff they offered up had been previously unreported. Listen, I think all pretty much think we know what happened last year. There's been no shortage of online chatter and scuttlebutt about that. So that seemed like well-traveled ground. But really seeing, in print, in black and white, how much of a Georgia guy Fromm has always been, it makes the potential of this season with he and Werner and Andrew Thomas, who spoke to us yesterday about his love for Georgia in his own state. It would make winning this year a pretty fun, cool thing. By the way, speaking of the Gators, mentioned them earlier. How about a Gator Hater updater? 1,019 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That number's going to keep climbing, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews plays all those positions. We reached 100 degrees yesterday. If your air conditioning wasn't working, you felt it yesterday. So get that $99 Smiley tune-up to get your system back to factory fresh specs, because it's not going to get cooler now for a while. So make sure you do what you need to do to make sure you're ready to go with an air conditioning unit for the rest of this summer. Early fall, hot in Georgia. Don't sleep sweating. By all means, check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com, and they'll get you back up and running. I know I say this every day, and I know every day I never do it. But today is a day when I must say that I got to get off the air here in a few minutes. We have a very busy day around DawgNation, so let me roll through a bunch of comments. Connor, if you want to hop on a little early today, we're going to roll through a few of these, and then we are going to get off the air because we've got a lot to take care of. I was on Facebook to start yesterday. Let me pop over to YouTube to begin the proceedings today, and we'll go through as many of your comments as you want to on as many subjects as you want to address, and we will talk about whatever you want to talk about. Brian Kephart's got jokes. That's always nice to see. Cody Birdsong says Kirby Smart allowed Sonny Michel to make a Hard Knocks-like series 2 years ago. What was the Hard Knocks style series that Sonny Michel was a part of? I don't remember that. I remember the quarterback stuff like the QB1. For the most part, Kirby's not going to have the power to keep Fields or Fromm from doing that, nor does he probably want to. I think Carson Beck's doing it this year. He probably likes the publicity for that. But do you agree with me, Connor, that Kirby's kind of a new wave coach? He likes the things that are attractive for recruiting. He's not letting HBO cameras come to Georgia. I just don't think he is.
He's not. I'd give anything if he did, though.
Oh, yeah.
I love Hard Knocks. I have not gotten a chance to watch last night's episode yet, but just the job HBO does is so well done. It's so interesting. You learn so much stuff. Yeah. And, I think they do a really good job of painting, how accurate some of these teams are. And you just have to look at last year with the Cleveland Browns. That team was a mess. Hugh Jackson was in way over his head. There was a ton of infighting between offensive coordinator Todd Hartley and Jackson, and it was pretty clear then that this wasn't going to work out. And then 7 weeks into the season, both Todd Haley and Hugh Jackson were gone.
Yeah. I mean, there was also the one. Do you remember when the Florida State show was on Showtime a couple of years ago?
Yes.
And I don't remember all the details of this, but there was something involving the quarterback situation in one of the episodes that I saw where I thought, ooh, this makes Florida State not come across looking so great. I don't even remember what the thing was. I mean, there is an element and aspect, because our buddy Mike Johnson was on the Falcons when they were on Hard Knocks. There is an element and aspect of once the cameras are in there, you have some control over some of what seeps out, but you can't control everything, nor can you control some of the guys that might start trying to play to the cameras a little bit more, especially in this self-aware age we're in now. And ultimately, that's the reason why I don't think Kirby Smart would want to do it.
Right. I mean, you look last year, there was Antonio Callaway getting arrested, and HBO had that conversation on camera where he went in and lied to the coaches about it. Former Florida Gator Antonio Callaway. And then, even this year, you look at Antonio Brown and all the things that are going on with his feet and his helmet, and I have no doubt that he's just trying to lean into the HBO aspect of it and try and get his name out there because of it.
Yeah, and the argument is, well, how much it will help recruiting, but the honest truth is the average age of a Hard Knocks viewer is a lot older than you are, Connor. You're still in your 20s. I'm guessing the average age of a Hard Knocks viewer is probably about 45 years old, because HBO for most people is kind of an expensive proposition. The same thing will be true with this. I don't know how many 17-year-old kids are watching the Alabama version of Hard Knocks on HBO. GB2 on YouTube has a different point. He says, I have a good feeling about this year, more so than in the past years. I think everyone is questioning our team, but most forget this team is made up of the 6'3", 1 and 2 recruiting classes dating back to 2016. So that's an interesting point from GB2, but I must admit, speaking as a fan for a moment, I could almost stand for the national media to be criticizing Georgia a little bit more. One of the things that sometimes frustrates me is that the media kind of tucks Georgia as that number 3 team in the country, and most people do like our buddy Barrett Sallee did the other day, where you got 4 playoff teams, you have Georgia making the playoff, but as the second SEC team. There's a lot of unanimity when it comes to Georgia, but when it comes to overall evaluations, I would say that the media's been harder on Tua Tagovailoa this offseason than it has been on Jake Fromm in Georgia, and Alabama's probably aided that just a little bit. In terms of if you really want to build some nobody believes in us momentum, you need a little more help from the media than what you've gotten. And, listen, I'd obviously, come on the show and talk about it if it were to happen. But in terms of what would aid Georgia a little bit, if we believe that rat poison is a thing, the phrase that Nick Saban's used before.
It's not.
I can almost stand to have a little more of that. I don't think Georgia gets as much of that as I would like for them to. Let me just give you a quick comparison. People look at Oklahoma and say that defense can't win a national championship. People look at Alabama and say, Dabo Swinney's figured out Alabama. People look at Notre Dame, the team in the playoff a year ago. That team just never belonged in the playoffs. I really don't think, even after losing the Sugar Bowl and losing to Alabama for a second consecutive year, I don't think Georgia gets as much of that as some of these other programs do. Maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. I don't think there's as much of that nationally as there are for some of the other teams.
So to continue a sort of succession, all right, an HBO joke, I'm going to make a Succession reference here. So there are 2 brothers on the show, and Succession is a fantastic show. If you have not watched it, B and I both very big fans of it.
I do enjoy it.
So Ronan is the younger brother, and he's kind of he's your typical middle child younger brother, kind of getting into trouble and stuff like that. And at the end of the first season, he blows up a rocket, but no one really is all that worried about it, and I'm not talking a firework. I'm talking a literal spaceship blows up because he sort of accelerates the timeline to get to where it is.
Oh, sure.
And normally it'd be just a disaster, big news, and everything like that. Except it's not, because Kendall kills a guy.
Right.
Kendall's the older brother, so everyone is just sort of focusing in on Kendall right now, while Ronan sort of scoots by, and everyone just sort of looks at it as, oh, it's Ronan being Ronan. In this case, Georgia is Ronan, and Alabama is Kendall, in the sense that, Alabama is the one that everyone is always looking at. They've always sort of had this expectation they were going to be the guy. And then when they messed up against Clemson, everyone is all angry at them. Whereas, Georgia losing to Alabama, in this case, blowing up a spaceship, it's just kind of, sort of par for the course. And that's, not really changing anyone's opinion of them.
Yeah, I mean, go back and look at SEC Media Days as a for instance on this. The big topic was the war of words between Alabama and Clemson. There are legit critics of Alabama because Alabama, at least from the perspective of the national media, is a more notable program. Georgia has had frustrations against Alabama, but that's kind of, for us, that's our whole life. For me, I talk about, those frustrations every day and how to upend them. But from a national media story, that's kind of below the fold. That's the B section. That's not the main topic in college football right now. So in terms of, shaking a Georgia first-team unit out of what was reported as a little bit of lethargy going back to Saturday, a little criticism might go a long way towards doing that.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, there's criticism, including our buddy Wayne Folan, about the Oregon shirt today. Why do you wear so many different schools' garb?
I am a objective media member. I support all schools equally, and it's a good sweatshirt.
But a lot of so-called objective media members don't wear any colors at all. Gosh knows they never stop talking about that. But you actually are. It's not so much objective. It's egalitarian.
I support everyone.
Yeah, you instead of wearing none, you actually wear them all.
Well, I would just also mention that most objective media members don't have quite the same level of fashion sense that I do. So,
but there's another thing here. In terms of your sort of non-Georgia stuff, I would actually argue against objectivity here a little bit because you clearly have a West Coast bias. You wear a lot of Pac-12 gear. You wear the Oregon. You wear the Stanford. You're clearly a bit of a West Coast guy. Where does that come from?
So one of my best friends from high school played for Stanford. So
there's that.
Late high school, I watched a lot of Pac-12 games. And, in college a lot of times, so I'd obviously be covering Georgia games. And when I would get home, it'd be, often pretty late at night. And the only game on to watch at that point in time were just Pac-12 games. So, in college, when I really, really got into college football, more often than not, the only thing I'm really watching is Pac-12 football. Just given, I'm at the stadium all day. I'm out around, running around, doing stuff in Athens.
So had you gotten home 2 hours later, would you be wearing a Hawaii shirt right now?
Maybe, yeah. No, but and if we want to pivot this into an actual football discussion, I think the Pac-12 has made a number of missteps, but I do think the football is still really good out there. It's just, I think that conference maybe maybe it doesn't. It's certainly not the top end that the SEC has, but that middle tier is just all so congested, and I think that hurts the league as a whole, where there isn't like a clear, these are the best 2 teams and they're head and shoulders above everyone else, or even 3 teams like say the SEC is this year with Alabama, LSU, and Georgia. There isn't that same sort of distance between those top 3 teams in the middle pack. They're all sort of much closer together. And I think that's sort of what's hurt the Pac-12 more than anything else.
All right, we have an emergency. Matt Rugavina says that he's going to be at Disney next week, which means he's going to be there while ESPN Game Day's there for the Week 0 showdown between Miami and Florida. He says, are there any sign ideas? Is there any way we can get Eddie?
I actually have some bad news.
What's that?
College Game Day has said there will be no signs or flags at the Disney World Game Day.
What?
Yeah,
How
the famous Washington State flag that they wave at every single game day.
Another Pac-12 reference from Pac-12 Connor over here. But I didn't know what you're talking about.
There is very serious concern on the internet that Washington State flag will not be able to be seen on game day. They're going to have to try and sneak it in there.
Why are they not doing signs? This is a Disney thing?
I think it's a Disney thing.
It's so dumb. That's really dumb.
Classic Florida.
Yeah, leave it to Florida to ruin something else.
Yep.
How much fun would it be to have Eddie, big blow up of him, the picture of him from Jacksonville last year, maybe? Not to be self-serving here, Matt, but that would have been an incredible thing to get Eddie, the blind squirrel, and the Gator hater sign on College Game Day. All right, we're going to go in a couple of minutes. For the first time in a few days, the battery's actually done pretty well, but it has now crashed and died. So, Connor, I'm going to let you drive the truck here for a couple of minutes.
All right, let's go over to YouTube.
By the way, did you hear that one of the airlines, I forget which one, will not allow these 15-inch MacBooks on their planes anymore?
It's a bad airline. But really, there's only one airline to ever actually fly. So.
Well, don't say which one it is.
I'm not giving. You think I'm going to give away free publicity?
But this is a true story. The laptop that I have, I forget which airline it is. They will not allow this laptop on, not this personal one, but this what do you call it? Series of laptops, 15-inch MacBooks. They won't allow them on their plane anymore because the batteries are so bad. They've been known to blow up. So this is the battery that I have right now, the laptop I have. I'm literally putting the life of myself and everybody else at DawgNation World Headquarters in danger simply by having this computer right now. But with that said, Connor, a couple comments, and we'll get ready to roll out of here.
Yeah, the comment section has just turned into a mess over my sweater. So
yeah, I knew that was coming.
I mean, if you would like, I can take the sweater off.
No.
I have a shirt on underneath. Are you ready to see it? It's an actual shirt.
All right.
I have proof. I'll take it off.
Oh Lord. Something about this makes me very nervous. Here I thought we were going to read a couple comments and get out of here. Now I've got Connor taking his clothes off live on air. Oh no. That's horrible.
You think I care what some internet people say about my clothes?
Don't get people started.
No, I mean,
these are my people. Don't get people started up. The honest truth though is that Connor is actually the first UGA grad that we've ever had working on this show. For a long time, like pre video, even as recently as like a year or so ago, we've had Maryland grad, big time Tennessee fan. We've had Ole Miss grad. We've had Syracuse grad. Maybe we've had a ton of non Georgia people that have worked on DawgNation Daily. So behind the scenes, there's always been quite an eclectic cast of characters. But with all of that said, can you please read a couple comments and let's get ready to go?
I'm sorry. I've clearly made things worse. I would just like to say I am a very proud Georgia graduate. Graduated in 2016, and again, I go to Athens a lot. My family still goes to Athens a lot. My sister is a student there now. So just because I wore an Oregon sweater, hate to break it to you guys.
Just please.
Let's. All right. I had a good question. Who? So at the end of the season, who is the player we are not talking about right now that is the biggest name to know?
I have a tendency to believe it may be on the defensive secondary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because I am doubting what we think of as the four pretty established starters, but between Daniel Stevenson, who I'm very high on, and Lewis Seen, I think one of those three is probably a pretty big part of this discussion somehow, some way. Y'all, the one thing I've been kind of on the kick of a little bit lately are the size of Georgia players. I mean, I think that Daniel and Stevenson's got these really long arms. They're a good example of what kind of like the new Georgia player sort of looks like. I think we're talking about one of them in some form or fashion. And I guess I would add to that, although I'm not ready to say who I think the name's going to be, if Georgia's a really good team, then there has to be a defensive lineman that we're not currently talking a bunch about. I mean defensive lineman, someone up front in the three-man front. There's got to be one of those guys who kind of blossoms and comes along. Otherwise, this is not an elite Georgia team. So with confidence, I'll say one of those three defensive back names that I just mentioned. With a degree of speculation, I'll look to a name on the defensive line, because unless this defensive line is drastically better, the areas that matter most, then we're talking about something less than college football playoff and contending for a national championship. So look for one of those guys. And, interesting buzz about Tremel Walthor as of late. Julian Rochester hopefully coming back from injury. You can make a case for various people, but it needs to be a defensive line name for Georgia to upgrade the way that we want it to.
Can I give you two that – so they might be starters for the Vanderbilt game, but we just haven't talked a lot about them, and granted, we haven't gotten a chance to speak to them yet. But there are two guys that have sort of stuck out to me are Malik Herring and Tyler Clark. I think those two guys are going to be the first-team guys, the defensive line, along with Jordan Davis out there. And, Tyler Clark has played a lot of football, and Malik Herring, when he played last year, when Georgia sort of let him loose against Florida and Georgia Tech, he had very good games. I will be interested to see how they sort of use them this year, because those are probably the two most disruptive defensive linemen in terms of, being able to create havoc plays, which Kirby Smart has talked about a lot. And I do think those might be the guys to watch that actually end up becoming not like an all-SEC performer or something like that, but a guy you sort of need to know as far as what they can do on the football field.
I think that Tyler Clark absolutely ought to be at least in the discussion of all-SEC performer. But in the case of Malik Herring, and please hear what I'm saying and don't hear what I'm not saying, the one thing that has colored my perception of Herring just a little bit is that Kirby Smart actually downplayed Herring's big performance against Georgia Tech a little bit on the basis of that being sort of opponent-specific, and the insinuation is Tech was just sort of easy to dominate. So in terms of that being a coming-out party for Malik Herring, I don't know that Georgia internally necessarily treated it that way, but this is a pretty spectacular athlete at the defensive line position, and I'd love to see him get that chance. Anything you want to read from either Facebook or YouTube before we go off the air here? And I apologize, folks, for not being able to read this
So there have been a couple of mentions of Trayvon Walker. You played the clip from Isaiah Wilson earlier today about
that
him
came out of nowhere for me a little bit.
Yeah, I was standing right there next to him when that comment was made. He did not hesitate to bring up Trayvon Walker, and I found that to be very interesting. I will say and everyone has raved about his athleticism and what he's able to do. The one stark difference you see between Trayvon Walker, and I think this is maybe the reason he's not right now at the top of the defensive line, sort of rankings. Upper body, he looks like how a 5-star prospect should look. But if you look down his torso, lower body, it pales in comparison to what a Tyler Clark, what a Julian Rochester sort of look like down there. And I think that might be why we might have to wait a little while to see him get on the field. But there also very well might come a point where he's just too athletic to keep off the field.
So I am not a former player, but here's the one thing I believe I know about football, if I had to suspect, because this is just human nature. The guy you're battling against who's the opposite of you is always going to be the guy you hate to face more than anything else. If you're a really fast defensive back but you're a little short, you hate the tall receiver. If you are a really fast receiver, but you have a hard time getting off the line of scrimmage against a bigger defensive back, you hate that guy. Isaiah Wilson is talented in a lot of ways, but the other thing that he brings to the table is he's just gigantic. And not to say that Trayvon Walker is small, but Trayvon's a more athletic defensive lineman than he is just going to maul you with huge with huge size. So I would imagine that Wilson's opinion may be unique to him a little bit in that I would imagine that of all the defensive line on the Georgia roster, I could see Trayvon Walker giving him fits in a way that some other guys don't, because you said before, up to this point in the very early stages of his college career, Walker's not that big of a guy compared to others, but he is a really sensational athlete. This is a guy that was a good basketball player, for instance. I imagine if you're a really big Isaiah Wilson, it's probably not that much fun having to deal with an entire, repertoire of moves and quickness and athleticism. I bet Isaiah Wilson probably does not like that all that
And
much.
Ben Cleveland said similar things about Trayvon Walker, and he also sort of fits that same physical mold.
Huge.
This will be the last question, and it's a good one from Jay Corey Hood. It's addressed to me, but it's to both of us. 2017, Georgia had Roquan Smith, unquestioned star of the defense. In 2018, DeAndre Baker, unquestioned star of the defense. Jay Corey Hood wants to know who is the star this year for the UGA defense.
Let me think.
He was the guy at the end of the year. I don't know about award winner, but the guy who is like the guy for the Georgia defense.
I'm tempted to give you a name you probably would not expect me to say. I'm tempted to say, not a national award winner. I don't believe he'll be one. I'm tempted to say Richard LeCount.
It's an interesting name.
I'm tempted to say that.
Big hitter. He's probably. I think he's better in pass coverage than J.R. Reed is, so he might be breaking up a few more passes there.
I think that LeCount is on the doorstep of really getting a lot of draft attention, and that's a powerful motivator for a lot of guys. And he's bigger. He said that he feels more comfortable at practice. He's apparently been working on his technique. I don't believe he's a national award winner. I don't know that this Georgia defense has one of those. But in terms of the face of the defense, I could see LeCount being that guy. Do you have an answer?
As far as best actual player, I think it's going to be Eric Stokes. But your point about LeCount sort of being a much more well-known name, I think that's going to propel him for many people to think he's the guy. And again, the difference I think between LeCount and Stokes is not all that big. I just think Stokes is going to be really, really good for this defense, learning under Kirby Smart and sort of blossoming like we saw DeAndre Baker do a year ago. But I think LeCount is going to be the guy that everybody talks about at the end of the season.
And listen, I will say along these lines that this is more of the Georgia defense that I've been hoping for, because as great as it was to have Roquan Smith in 2017, I came on this show a lot and said, I don't like the fact that Georgia's hopes are so pinned on one guy. If Roquan had gotten hurt in 2017, it would have been game over, go home. With all due respect to Lorenzo and Davin and John Atkins and a lot of other contributors in that defense, if it's not Roquan Smith, you're not going to Pasadena. Last year, once again, a little bit deeper, but DeAndre Baker's importance was so outsized for the Georgia defense last season. So this year, the fact that I don't look around and see a national award winner, but I see a good defense, to me, is just a little bit more evenly distributed in terms of the responsibility, in terms of the productivity. I actually think that's a better overall situation for Georgia because, you can think about the freshmen that could make an impact but have veterans who are still putting a little bit of a ceiling on their opportunity to contribute right away. This is actually a little bit more of the Georgia defense that I've been hoping for, one that's a little bit more evenly distributed. But I don't see a national award winner candidate right now.
I don't either. Facebook giving a lot of love to Monty Rice.
That's an interesting name. You know what? He's not spectacular in the way that Nakobe might turn out to be, or the way that I still have hopes that Channing Tindall or Quay Walker might become. He's not that, but man, he is to use the oldest cliche in the book, he is a lunch pail guy for sure.
He's just a good football player. If Nakobe Dean pops like Nakobe Dean thinks we will, I wonder if he's going to take a lot of the attention away from Rice. Mm-hmm. But, if you want to, I wrote this morning, I think, of the guys on offense, Charlie Warner is the guy, of the skill position guys, the guy who has the highest floor. just in terms of what you're going to get out of him. He might not have the high upside that, a Pickens or a Zamir White has. I think on the defensive side of the ball, that's what Monty Rice is. You know what he's going to be. He might not be the most spectacular player. He might not be Roquan, but he's just going to be a very good fundamental football player to have, and I think not having him against Alabama last year was a sneaky, underrated loss.
I think it's incredibly important. It's a really good answer. Let me also mention a comment that I meant to get to before, and I promise we're going off the air after this. Mary Ellen Tolper was talking about my comments about Jake Fromm earlier. Mary said that she agrees that she would really enjoy – actually, leave your microphone on for 1 second – that she would really enjoy Georgia winning a championship with Fromm this year because – of the fact that Fromm does seemingly have this deep connection to the program going back to his time when he was just a fan as just a small child. And, Connor, could you see for Georgia fans why this would be a little more special than what seems to be a little bit more of a transactional relationship that Georgia has with some recruits, some players who are kind of here now or maybe coming to Georgia because it's the place to be? For Fromm, it does seemingly run a little deeper than that. If you could win it this year with him, that is a story that I think is even better than obviously how elated every Georgia fan's going to be once the Dogs finally do win it all.
Right. Well, I think this kind of plays into why so many people wanted to see Tank Bigsby as a part of this Georgia class. Yeah. I think the Georgia fan base, while it has grown to sort of be a national fan base, a lot of it is still located in Georgia. And I think, as much as Georgia recruits nationally, I do think people still want this team to be made up of Georgia boys and guys who grew up playing in this state. And Fromm, I think, very much, epitomizes what it means to be, because, Atlanta is just a very different area than from what the rest of Georgia is. Whereas if I wanted to tell someone what I think the average person from the state of Georgia looks like, I would probably show them a picture of Jake Fromm and sort of explain the activities that he likes to do. Football's important, fishing, faith. Those sort of things, I think that's something that he has in common with a lot of people from not just the metro Atlanta area, but the state of Georgia as a whole. And I think that really plays into why, he is as likable as he is.
I did think the way that Sports Illustrated characterized the quarterback competition was a little bit different than maybe I saw it, but that's probably more of a discussion for a different day. Good stuff from both ESPN and Sports Illustrated taking a closer look at Jake Fromm. We're back tomorrow for DawgNation Daily and our R.S. Andrews cool down. Make sure you check them out online, rsandrews.com. If your water heater's in the blink, for instance, they can come get that fixed for you, or if you need to replace one, that's never a good thing, but at R.S. Andrews, they'll at least put a smile on your face with how they get it done for you, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That's R.S. Andrews' promise for you. Story after story, they've been delivering smiles. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. Good stuff at the AJC as well. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. I thought Chip's piece looking at Tom Maher's reaction to Brenton Cox going to Florida, I thought that was really interesting. So you can check that out online, ajc.com. And really, Brave stuff. Braves kind of got back to their winning ways against the Mets last night. That was cool to see. A lot of politics going on right now. Incredible heat wave affecting the state of Georgia and really pretty much everywhere right now. Just kind of check in throughout the day to stay up to date on what's going on. Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. Hope you'll check that out. You'll have a great day. I'll be back this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. We'll talk some recruiting with our buddy Jeff Sintel and see you tomorrow right back here on DawgNation Daily all over again.